on the webcast. Today's meeting of the Regeneration Committee. Members of the public may like to follow us on Twitter at London Assembly Regeneration. The main topic of discussion is regeneration creating employment opportunities. But first, we have a few items of formal business to go through before we start our discussion. Please, to start off with, can I ask you to make sure your electronic devices are at least on silent and maybe even turned off so we don't have any unnecessary interruptions. Can I start by asking, do we have any apologies?
Thank you, Chairman. We do not have any apologies today. Okay.
Can I ask committee members to note the recommendations set out in items 2?
Noted.
Can I ask Assembly members to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interests or any other relevant interests?
None.
None. Standing items 3, 4 and 5 I'd like to take together. Can we note the committee's membership in terms of reference and standing delegation?
Noted.
Can we confirm the minutes of our last meeting held on February the 18th, on the 6th of February 2018?
Agreed, Chair.
Yes. Can we note the report and progress on actions?
Yep.
Can we note the actions taken by the former chair under delegated authority, and can we note our report, Centres of Excellence, and our visit to the LLD's area?
Chair, I can't disagree with the former chair. So, noted.
I'm sure you'll be very popular if you're the former chair. Now that we come to the end of our formal business, we'll move into the main area of discussion today, creating employment from regeneration opportunities. Can I welcome our guests to the meeting and invite them to introduce themselves, please? Let's start with Michael. Hey.
Good afternoon. So, my name is Michael Heanue. I'm a Principal Policy Officer here in the Skills team, now based over at Union Street. And I'm responsible for developing the Mayor's Construction Academy scheme and supporting capital investments in further education.
Hi there, my name's Tony Wilson. I'm the Director of Policy and Research at the Learning and Work Institute, and we're an independent centre that provides research, evaluation, analysis and other support to a range of organisations involved in learning and skills, but that's included the GLA and a number of London councils.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Danny Edwards. I am a Strategy and Partnership Manager at Southwark Council, just across the road. I am responsible for delivery of strong local economy priorities for the local authority. I manage the Council's local economy team.
I'm Julie Sexton. Apologies for being late. I'm the Senior Manager here at the GLA of the delivery team within the Regeneration Unit, and our team is the team responsible for delivering the GLA's co-financing organisation responsibilities.
And I'm Helen Stonelake, and I work with Julie specifically on project management of the European Social Funds element of the delivery team's work.
Okay, thank you. As is customary, as the chairman, I'll do the kick-off question. Please, could you give a brief description of the activities of your team and the aims and what you provide to this space? Yes, let's start with you.
So we're within the delivery team. We're responsible for managing a whole range of different types of programmes. And as I mentioned, one of the key one that you'll be interested in today is the European Social Fund, the GLA's European Social Fund programme. It's probably worth me just mentioning that the GLA has two functions in terms of European Social Fund. It has the European Programme Management Unit, which is a different team, and they're responsible for managing the European Social Fund programme for London as a whole on behalf of DWP. So our team manages the GLA's co-financing programme, which is basically delivery of projects by organisations in London to support Londoners. So we're one of a number of co-financing organisations in London, the others being DWP, the National Offender Management Service, the Education and Skills Funding Agency, and also there are the Big Rotary Fund and a number of the the sub-regional partnerships. And we're obviously the GLA CFO. The two teams are required to be separate because the GLA can't be seen to have a preferential position in terms of attracting the European Social Fund or getting an allocation of European Social Fund, or we can't be allowed to be given a easier ride, perhaps is the way to say it, in terms of managing the funds. Our current ESF programme is small compared to the national CFOs. It's a programme of about 25 million. That's 50% ESF, 50% other sources of match funding, some of it GLA, but also some other sources. We work very closely with colleagues in policy teams such as the skills team and the education and youth team to help them really to develop and procure and manage the projects that will deliver against the Mayor's policies in those areas. That's probably the main thing to say in terms of our team's role, I think.
Thank you. If I jump over you, Helen, because I'll come back to you for a second question.
I'll just be reiterating what Julie said,
exactly.
so jump over me.
Thank you. Let's go with Michael.
So, thank you. So I work in the skills and employment team, and currently our work involves producing the skills strategy for London, which is largely where much of what you're asking about today will sit in terms of the future direction of travel and the policies that we're developing. As I mentioned, I'm also involved in developing the Mayor's Construction Academy scheme, which was described in the manifesto and is about to be launched in June to improve the number of Londoners getting jobs in the construction sector. That's the main area of my work right now. The strategy itself alludes to both the devolution of the adult education budget, which we will be responsible for from next year. It also alludes to the Construction Academy scheme, which will be developed, is to be launched next month, and will see investments of up to £8 million in capital in construction facilities across London's providers of construction skills. And there'll also be revenue funds made available to create a series of hubs across London to exist where there are opportunities to bring together construction training facilities with construction firms reporting vacancies they struggle to fill.
Thank you.
So Learning and Work Institute, we're a team of about 45 people, and we deliver research, evaluation, analysis, consultancy and implementation support to a range of organisations that are involved in learning, skills and employment. Of most relevance to this, I suppose, we do a lot of work with the department, funded by the Department for Education, looking at how we can implement and improve the delivery of adult learning and skills, with a particular focus on apprenticeships, on career learning, on basic skills and capabilities, and more recently on the devolution of the adult education budget to the 7 and now 9 mayoral combined authorities. We also evaluate a lot of programmes and do a lot of sort of independent analysis of what's happening in the employment and skills market. So in London, that's included evaluating some GLA programmes, European Social Fund programmes, and it's also included evaluating programmes for a number of councils, including one in recent past at Southwark, where we're delivering with partners. And we're evaluating working capital, which is a devolved employment and health programme from DWP, which is soon to be replaced by the devolved work and health programme. So yeah, that sort of thing.
Thank you.
So Southwark's local economy team, as I said, has got responsibility for delivery of council plan priorities around promoting a strong local economy. For 2014 to 18, that included quite challenging commitments around supporting 5,000 residents into work and creating 2,000 friendships, both of which I'm happy to say we've delivered. We are also responsible for the priority around making sure local residents benefit from regeneration activity that's going on in the borough. So related to that, we commissioned the Southwark Construction Skills Centre, which looks to improve the supply of Southwark residents into construction jobs that exist as a result of the regeneration that's taken place in the borough. My team leads on the development and delivery of the council's economic wellbeing strategy, and more recently the Southwark Skills strategy, which was adopted by Cabinet in December, and we're now working with a range of partners on the development of our delivery plan for that strategy.
I just want to thank you for that. I want to focus in slightly bit more on your activities, and I'll ask this to all members at this point. What function, what role does your team play in improving access to the labour market and inclusion as well? Because there's some individuals who are very far away from the labour market, and there's some who just need a little nudge, let's call it, to get there. What role does your team or organisation play in that?
I'm happy to go first. So as I say, we're a sort of research and policy and development organisation. So we very much support organisations that are at the front line of delivering services. So that has included, for example, right now we're working with the Department for Education on their 5 Cities initiative, which is around improving access to apprenticeships in 5 cities for black and minority ethnic people who are particularly underrepresented in apprenticeships. It's included working with DFE on learning disability and difficulty pathfinders to improve access to apprenticeships. We've been commissioned by a number of and worked with a number of councils to improve access to the labour market and access to employment and learning opportunities for disabled people in particular, which is a real area of focus at the moment. But similarly for a range of disadvantaged groups. We also produce quite a lot of sort of analysis and insight, which is intended to support service delivery and support organisations, commissioners of services, and also those delivering them.
Helen?
Well, for us, in terms of the European Social Fund, which I will ask Helen to chip in, but we, so the European Social Fund projects that we fund support people to engage and re-engage with the labour market, and that might be at work or training, and that's the remit of European Social Fund. Participants can either be in work and progressing in work, or they might be unemployed, and then usually, because that's the focus of European Social Fund, they're usually at a disadvantage in the labour market for one reason or another. So it may be to do with personal characteristics, they may be from BME background or disabled, it might be their life experiences, they might have been homeless or an ex-offender, it might be due to low skill levels or lack of relevant experience, that type of thing. So for all sorts of reasons, the individuals we support would be disadvantaged in the labour market. And the types of activities that our projects provide, well, Helen will give you a bit more detail, but they're all around improving people's readiness to work, whether that's through training or through some of those softer skills or through mentoring or volunteering. The other thing that's probably worth mentioning is that ESF also enables us to provide some of the wraparound support that quite a lot of the participants need, like we can pay for childcare, we can provide vet advice, we can fund travel costs, or our projects can as part of the package of support they offer. And there's also some funding in there for activities that bring employers and training organisations together to improve the relevance of the training and education provision out there or sector for employers' needs. And there's a good example of that that's been running over the last few years, which actually the Education Skills and Funding Agency have been running, but which the Education and Youth team here and my team worked with them to develop, called the Careers Clusters Project, which brings employers and schools together to try and improve the careers advice and guidance for young people. Probably worth Helen saying a little bit more about some of the other projects, if you'd like, about some of the other projects that we deliver and the types of people that we're supporting through that.
Yeah. So I'll give you a bit more info on the actual groups we're looking to support and how we're looking to support them, and just move me on if it's too much information. So we, with European Social Funding, we can really focus on supporting groups who are very far from the labour market or face particular barriers. So at the moment, our kind of suite of programmes covers quite a lot of things. We're looking generally to support about 10,000 people over the course of the programme, hopefully. 500 businesses. We have projects at the moment that focus particularly on supporting veterans of the armed services and particularly early leavers from the armed services, and support them with volunteering and holistic wraparound support to find employment and translate their skills into the civic employment market. And we're looking at supporting young people who are at risk of dropping out of college or training or education, and picking them up just before or as they drop out, and supporting them to continue in a form of activity to help them get back into education, employment or training before they've been out of that for a while and it becomes more entrenched. We are looking particularly at supporting care leavers find employment as a group that tends to face more barriers generally, and we're also looking at supporting a range of people with digital skills training. And a lot of that is looking at how training providers and businesses can work collaboratively so that the training being provided is relevant to what the business needs are, and enables businesses to access local pools of talent who have the right skills. We've just launched a project looking at supporting early years practitioners. So I think Julie mentioned that childcare is often a major barrier for people into finding work or sustaining work. And London has a particular issue with this, it being very expensive, although it's high quality, the quality isn't always there and the flexibility isn't always there. So we're looking at supporting leaders and how they grow their management and leadership skills and business skills so they can sustain and grow quality practices, particularly for families who face more disadvantage. We have a number of high-level skills.
Can I just slightly change your focus?
Yes.
Who evaluates the effectiveness of the things that you are implementing?
We have. Do you want to put that for your programme evaluation? Yeah.
We've got what we're doing this time round. We always have an independent evaluation of our programmes, and in fact, I think Learning and Work Institute did our last one, combined with SQW for our GLA ESF Youth Programme, which finished 18 months ago. And for this programme, what we're in, because it's a programme with a lot of relatively small, quite niche projects, what we're doing is that we've arranged for all the projects to do self-evaluations. They might have an independent evaluator do them, or they might do them themselves, but we're supporting them in that by, we have an external evaluation company providing workshops and one-to-one support to those organisations to help them to develop up their theories of change and refine what the measures are that they will use to be able to show whether they've delivered the
and where is all this collected? Because obviously we want to understand best practice.
Yeah. How's
that best practice transmitted out there? What effect will this have on the development of the policies around the adult education budget? Where is all these things coalescing together?
So the adult education budget one, I think, is quite useful, or quite a good link, because we within the ESF team will actually shortly be moving over to the skills team, and we're working very closely to develop a ESF programme which will be much larger than our current one, which will be matched with devolved AEB funding, which would enable us to do things at a bigger scale and perhaps tackle some of the areas we haven't been able to do with our current programme. And in terms of feeding in, so our evaluations are all available publicly. We share them with people. I actually think that the last one, apologies for this, but it doesn't seem to be on the internet, but it is publicly available. We have shared it with people, and it's out there. So we obviously have looked at the skills strategy and we haven't led it, that's Michael's team, but we have commented on it and input to it, and we've shared our documentation with the team as they've developed the strategy, and as they are developing the AEB, we're working quite closely with them.
We'll come back to the adult education budget. Just to quickly focus on Tony, what works for groups that are far away? Is there a set of tactics that have worked internationally, nationally? Yeah. How are we, focusing on these groups with tried and tested methods?
Yeah. And if I can answer that, then I think we would all be in a much better place. I'll give it a go. I mean, there's a whole industry around trying to really understand what works for whom, how, and in what contexts. And a lot of this is quite context specific as well. What might work with young black men, for example, in South London, in terms of improving aspirations and engagement and access to making the right decisions around skills and employment and so on, may not work in the same way at all for single parents or mothers who live in Tower Hamlets or something. So actually understanding kind of context and how we can better tailor and deliver interventions for different groups is really important. I think there are 4 really key things that we're trying to address in our labour market programmes and interventions. Firstly is improving people's ability to prepare for work and to access work and look for work. So these are kind of classic employment related skills, but it's also about confidence, self-confidence, self-belief, and the ability to deal with setbacks, but it can also be things like, just how to navigate the jobs market, which isn't simply, we tend to think now it's all about, online. It isn't. It's a lot of it's quite old-fashioned, actually. A lot of it's about who you know and how you engage. That's first. Second is about addressing particular barriers to work, and I think we've got real challenges. We've got challenges on that first point, by the way, in London. I think careers is a case in point. But on the second, addressing barriers, which is really important, I think. Parents, as a case in point, costs of childcare, which has already been referenced, huge issue. Disabled people, health-related barriers that might make it harder to get into work, or indeed once you're in work to stay there. So those are two examples. Also older people, people with care and responsibilities, and so on. Young adult carers would be a case in point too. So that's two things. The third then is around how we tackle like signals that are sent by people being out of work. So when you're out of work, and you're applying for a job, you're far less likely to get a job than people who are already in work. Because if you've got 100 applicants, and one of them's got a 6-month gap in their CV or has no qualifications, then you know that person goes to the bottom of the queue. And you can't address that by just getting people to apply for more jobs or by helping them with their childcare. Addressing the signal of being out of work is a really significant challenge, and it often requires things like work experience, but also quite intensive skill support and even job creation programs sometimes. And then the fourth is skills, and that can be occupation-specific skills, and in London, particular challenges around technical skills, around apprenticeship, take up of and access to. But it's also just job-related skills, really, time management, how you work in teams, communication skills, and some IT and so on skills. Now, so I always say, when you're thinking about programs, think about for your group, what are the challenges you're trying to address? What do you think are the barriers, or what do you think are the issues that are preventing those people from being able to be secure in employment? Think about it in terms of those four things, and then think about how the interventions that you're designing can help to address that. So I think all of them should, at their heart, have really effective relationships between a coach or an advisor or a mentor and the individual, because I think all of this is, so much of this is about just maintaining self-belief and confidence and having support there, but not kind of learned helplessness, but the right kind of support. And then it's about thinking about the design of your interventions. If it's skills needs, then thinking about how you deliver that and how you engage with the right partners. If it's about barriers, thinking about how you work with health services or childcare providers or house or landlords. And if you've got particular issues about signals, like take long-term unemployment as a case in point, and what are we doing about work experience, what are we doing, etc. So I could go on, but there's no simple like what works, but I do think so much of it is about personal relations and motivation and the right kind of support and helping people to deal with setbacks, know the way around the labour market and get the right support when they need it. One final thing I'd say is, I think in getting out of silos, not thinking about this in terms of skills or in terms of employment or in terms of regeneration or housing or childcare, but thinking about how we integrate that and make it, certainly for the individual, make it seamless, and for us as practitioners, try to do the best we can to join up is really key. And there's a number of areas that have put system change right at the top of their priorities. And I personally would like to see system change much clearer in the skills strategy, transforming actually how services work together, because I think that's ultimately how we drive change, is thinking about this in terms of health, economy, skills, local growth, social inclusion, not just one silo about skills or whatever.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to my colleague now.
Yeah, I want to explore 3 areas specifically. One is on unemployment, then go on to the barriers. Tony's been talking about those, and also issue about people getting stuck in low skill kind of related jobs. Now, the figures here show that, for example, London's unemployment rate currently is record low at about 6%, but it is still above national average. Given this situation, what do you see as the main barriers for active participation in labour market by Londoners? I don't know whether somebody from GLA or Tony want to kickstart.
I'm very happy to go first, just briefly, because it kind of carries on from what I was saying a moment ago. So one thing I would say, I suppose before this, is London is obviously a jobs machine. I mean, it creates enormous jobs growth and opportunities. The trouble is, it doesn't always do that for London residents. And I hold my hand up as somebody who works in London but lives on the south coast, and I'm one of those people who comes in and does a job in London but isn't of the city. So how actually a large part of this is about, we don't have a problem here about labour demands. There is stuff about there's absolutely issues about quality of jobs, but the real challenge here is about how we connect people to the jobs that are being created all the time in the city. And I do think that as I said, clearly issues around skills and access to skills are really important, and issues around how we give people the right support to find work is really important. But particular challenges in London is that we do have it's quite significant and severe disadvantage in the city. To an extent we do see in other cities as well, but where that's often manifests itself in different ways, very diverse groups, and how we think about how we address that can be very different people. So a large part of this is that we have got significantly disadvantaged residents. But then there are some specific, I think, London challenges around, for example, performance at 16 to 18, which isn't as good as it is below 16. Apprenticeships, we don't create as many apprenticeships in London, and we certainly don't, and it's certainly not as an integral a strategy, if you like, for young people as it is in other places. Issues around childcare, around housing, and other things that can make it harder for people to travel for work are particularly challenging. And this issue about travelling for work is, I think, it's really important in a London context. And I think, just I think for the GLA and for councils and other public services working in this space, how we kind of coordinate across activities is a huge challenge, because we've got different layers of government. We've got national government and local government, different areas of responsibility, and that coordination piece is really hard. And I think it will be a real challenge in the skills strategy as well. It's how we make sure that we don't just look in the narrow confines of an individual borough, but we're able to look across London. Quite a set of challenges, I think.
Mike.
I can add to that. So you may be aware that in 2016 there was a review of the skills system in London, where all further education was looked at very closely. That encouraged providers and local stakeholders, including local authorities, to actually look at what's being offered in their area with a view to improving the curriculum offer over time. It did focus more upon the financial aspect of the skills system and where there might be efficient mergers taking place to make that more efficient. But that was a very good first step, I think, in getting the conversation going about how we can be more locally responsive to what the skills needs are. We'll be very clear in the skills strategy about the role of employer engagement in achieving that. We must have employers on board, informing what the curriculum is at the right levels, at the right levels of accessibility too. We are going to drive that very clearly through the Mayor's Construction Academy. It exists with employers and providers in the same space. That's to me is a huge opportunity that we can maximise getting that right. But employers being in the space is absolutely essential. Working closely with the sub-regional partnerships through both the area reviews and now the development and the rollout of the skills strategy is moving us in the right direction.
Do you want to come in from local authority perspective?
I guess I'd just like to talk a bit about some of the work we do in Southwark, which is a lot of the focus is around sort of dealing with the four issues that Tony's highlighted. Across the board really, particularly the top two in terms of supporting residents to prepare and access work and sort of addressing particular barriers. We've got big investment in our Southwark Works initiative, which supports Southwark residents to access employment with a particular focus on those residents that are furthest from the labour market, with particular barriers, including residents with learning disabilities, physical and mental health issues, vulnerable young people, the over 50s. And I think what's critical to the success of those programmes is it's a commission support service that works with a range of providers who are specialists in their area. So they understand the issues that our residents with these complexities are dealing with, and they understand how best to work them. They know the barrier, they know the borough, they know how to support residents to navigate the kind of the landscape, if you like. It's not without its challenges, and I wouldn't say it's a fully integrated system. I think if you could identify a fully integrated system somewhere, then they've cracked it. There are definite challenges around that. But for example, the Southwark Works caseworkers know who to call in our housing department if they're dealing with a resident with housing issues. It doesn't fast track that resident in terms of accessing that support, but but it facilitates conversations that may not otherwise have been had. And as I say, it helps residents to navigate the system, which is, without that kind of support, is just extremely difficult. Moving on to sort of construction, I was asked to kind of particularly talk about our Southwark Construction Skills Centre. That's really around...
If I can stop you there.
Yeah, you can.
We're picking up construction-related topic later on.
Okay,
after,
sure.
Yeah. So, okay. Are you done then?
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked about the issues about level of unemployment. We talked about barriers, and also when you have jobs, for example, often we hear that people get stuck in low-skill related jobs with low wages to go with that as well. In your experience, is that the true kind of reflection of what can and does happen? And how can we get over that particular aspect? Because that's critical, that there is that progression at all levels.
I mean, the evidence...
What's being done?
Yeah, the evidence is certainly there. The skills strategy highlights some of the statistics that show that in London, London residents that are employed in low-skilled occupations, there's not much transfer then into higher skilled occupations. So people clearly are getting stuck there, and there's quite a lot of cycling from low-paid job to low-paid job that goes on. So there's definitely evidence for that. And I think probably Tony knows more of the detail.
Just the stats around that, I've looked at them, are evident, but what is a structural problem? Is it a fact of those people not having access to training, or is it a fact that those jobs don't exist?
Yeah, well, so both and more. So partly this, there's been long-running trends towards often lower quality and lower paid work being more prevalent in the economy. And partly that's about globalisation and global trade. And so this idea of what's a sort of a disappearing middle, if you like. There's very highly skilled jobs which are increasingly tradable or can be automated or whatever. But the things that really drive like the real value added sort of job creation in cities like London. There's then often quite low skilled and low paid jobs which aren't really tradable, like the sort of hairdressing and cleaning and so on, where people will always always rely on people being able to do those things. So there's a sort of there's a sort of top and bottom, and in the middle there's a lot of jobs which can be traded, which can be delivered in by other countries at cheaper prices, or indeed can be automated and so on. So we've seen what's been described as a kind of polarisation in the labour market over decades. But what we've also seen a couple of trends in recent years. One is a reduction in unionisation, and generally a kind of a change in the balance of power between employers and workers when negotiating pay and so on. And that's undoubtedly been a factor. I don't want to overplay it, but it's been a factor in things like the reduction in workplace training and reduction in collective bargaining, leading different pay settlements and so on. But also the big recession a decade ago was a massive cyclical shock, and that led to a real explosion in particularly in temporary and insecure employment, which has now come back down again. But what you'll tend to see in recessions is these kind of cyclical things can become structural. And in previous recessions, a good example of that would be like long-term unemployment, where people become unemployed in a recession, but if you don't deal with it, then they'll become long-term unemployed and you get significant issues. What we've seen is employers increasingly, a labour market that's increasingly being characterised by low-paid and insecure work, and that's become more of a feature in the last few years post the recession. It hasn't completely gone back to how it was. Now, there's various things which might suggest actually that as competition for jobs increases, as it will, particularly as a tighter labour market, fewer people competing for more jobs, you might see some rebalancing of that. So those structural things might start to unwind a bit, but there's long-running things I think are weighing against that. I mean, we've got these issues around low pay and no pay cycles, and of course what matters is relative pay. And when housing costs are exploding in a massive asset bubble boom, fueled by printed money and everything else, and costs of living are increasing at the moment, then even if your nominal pay is increasing, your real pay is going down. So these challenges around working poverty are really big.
The question is, what are we doing collectively?
So,
whether the GLA, the mayor, local authorities, private sector, to improve the situation, because once you're stuck, it's almost like you could be unemployed. Okay, if you're lucky, you might have a job, low paid, maybe low skill job if you haven't got skills, and you get stuck in it. Surely that can't carry on.
So,
what are we doing?
Yeah, so I wouldn't, yeah, so, and then I think there's a set of things you can do and are being done, particularly on how we better support individuals. We might call kind of supply side measures, support individuals to progress in work and to improve. I should say, I wouldn't want to massively overplay this, because insecure employment is a feature of the labour market. It's not like it's a majority of people in work. You know, so our estimates, we think about 1 in 5, between 1 in 5 and 1 in 4 workers in London are low paid, and a good proportion of those are kind of be stuck in low pay for at least a year. And so it is an issue, but it's not like, you know, it's not the whole labour market. But in terms of it's easier, I think, for us and for government, and GLA have done really good work on in-work progression and in-work progression support. It's much easier for us to think about how we can support individuals to find new jobs or to improve their training so they can progress in work. So the GLA in-work progression work is a case in point of that. Also, the Trust for London have funded a lot of voluntary and community sector-led activity, which we've been involved in too, called Step Up. The funding for that will be coming to an end fairly shortly, but that's been working with particular groups, for example, Latin American cleaners in South London, residents of social housing in Tulse Hill, young creatives stuck in self-employed creative jobs, etc., to help them to progress. So that's the stuff we can definitely do on the supply side, and a lot of that is about how we make, so AEB devolution, adult education and budget devolution is a case in point, real opportunities to use that funding to support in-work groups in a way that the national centralised funding doesn't enable us to do. I do think there's something else though which is harder on the demand side, which is about how we address some of those bigger structural challenges. And I think the GLA can play a really important, or the Assembly and the GLA can play a really important kind of convening and influencing role in encouraging employers, probably at a sector level, working with particular sectors, to really think about how they can improve their offer, really invest in probably technical education as a route into thinking about this, thinking through how we get more consistency in recognising career ladders within sectors, and then taking a more cooperative and collaborative approach to how we do that. There's a number of examples in the US, of all places, where this has been done really well, looking at career ladders at city levels. And so I do think that's got to be part of it as well, is thinking about how we engage employers and sectors.
So we have a number of European social funded projects in development which are seeking to do what Tony just said with the in-work progression support, and we are looking at sectors which are typically low paid, where actually that might be part of the nature of the sector. So we're working with the Cultural and Creative Industries team to look at how we can support employability and skills development in the creative enterprise zones, which are currently being developed. And one element of that is looking at supporting smaller creative or maybe even self-employed artists to do skills gaps analysis and find out what kind of business support, what training we could provide them with, which would help them grow their business, or potentially people in their business, and where they have very low revenue, what we can do to provide skills, mentoring, coaching, and again holistic support that's going to enable them to progress skills-wise. There's not always necessarily progressing into a high-paid role as an element of that, because actually sometimes that's the nature of the industry, and the same way that the care industries that we're looking at supporting as well. Care industries have a lot of social value, but by their nature have quite low pay. However, there are skills development that we can do within that, which will help people grow and sustain their businesses, which enables them to remain in business and provides more social benefit while helping someone get more work satisfaction in the workplace and feed that down to their staff. And we're also looking at doing some work with the LEAP, with the growth hubs, to support smaller businesses which are led by people who are underrepresented in business generally. So we're particularly looking at disabled people, women, and BAME communities, and seeing what we can do again to support them with skills gap analysis and see where we can come in with ESF funding to provide qualifications and training that they may not, as small businesses, have the capacity to deliver themselves.
And with the new AEB programme, some within that there are strands which are looking particularly at skills for people in work and training for people in work, in order to help them to develop. As Helen said, one of the issues is that it doesn't necessarily automatically lead to someone getting a higher paid job or a better job, but at least you're potentially increasing skill level so people have more transferability and more options about the labour market.
I've come across some good examples of partnership working whereby tackling the challenge around accessing these individuals, actually getting to them to be able to help them. And examples that spring to mind, housing associations are very well positioned in this place with their residents. Similarly, there was an exercise, I'm not sure if you're aware of it, Tony, in West London some years ago called the Skills Escalator.
We evaluated it.
Oh, wow. There you go. But that was very bespoke in that it accessed, it was all about accessing low-skilled, low-paid individuals in the private rental sector, and it was very targeted in how it set about, and there's very useful evaluations of that. So, I mean, Julie's mentioned already the AEB presents an opportunity in the future, as does the Construction Academy scheme, where there are tangible programmes that we can actually drive forward. But in the meantime, there are pockets of activity that we can learn from that are making a difference.
May I just add very quickly, because we're also doing some work in this area. I think there's definitely a movement away towards the focus on sort of better quality, better paid work throughout all of our programmes, and I think that has to be welcomed. I think one of the good things about universal credit is it's moving the conversation away from kind of more hours to better paid work, and how we can support our residents into better paid work. Southwark works in partnership with our partners in Lambeth and Lewisham through our Better Placed initiative. We've done quite a lot of work around supporting residents into work, looking at the whole kind of wraparound support, the whole systems approach. We've also recently started to pilot a new initiative around supporting residents from low paid jobs into better paid jobs. It's very early days at the moment, but we are optimistic that pilot will deliver some really good learning for us, which we'll be able to share with colleagues. But like others, there's definitely a movement in that direction.
Just before I move you on to my colleague, this idea of progressing through employment, how well is that replicated in training? Because obviously you can go and you can get a level of training, but can you get the next level of training to move yourself up? The two things, to my mind, seem related. Will that be in the strategy, how people can ladder up?
Absolutely, recognising where progression opportunities exist, but in the areas of the economy where the growth presents itself. So it's about it being relevant to what's actually happening on the ground. And again, I come back to that being driven by it being led by employers being in the space that make those decisions. The Mayor did talk about using advanced learner loans as part of the solution here in the manifesto. We need to explore that as a policy area, about how we can, whether we should, how we promote other means of accessing funds and the means with which to improve your level of attainment, whether that's through the adult education budget or additional funds that may be coming available at the same time.
Tony?
Yes, we're going back to Danny. You can make your pitch now in terms of all the work you've done on construction, please. The question specifically is our focus on construction and the jobs generated through large-scale regen projects. In your professional experience, what are the biggest barriers to employment opportunities created in construction? Can I ask you to be a little bit specific, because I think, like all these things, we're very good at having these general discussions, but I haven't really picked up many specifics of how we're going to do things better in the future, really. Yeah.
I will. I'll try to be specific, and then I'll try to articulate how we're kind of overcoming some of those barriers locally through the skills centre. One of the biggest challenges is we have, particularly in Southwark, we're very lucky. We've got a huge amount of regeneration on our doorsteps, and as a result of that, we have a huge number of jobs, both in terms of construction jobs and end-use jobs. How we how, particularly in terms of construction, how we equip Southwark residents with the skills they need to be able to access those jobs is one of the big challenges. We've got a very successful local Section 106 programme, which does generate a huge number of job opportunities for Southwark residents. One of the traditional challenges is how are we going to access the residents with the skills to be able to kind of access these roles, both in terms of jobs and apprenticeship opportunities. So that was really one of the drivers behind the Southwark Construction Skills Centre. How do we improve the supply of local residents into those jobs by equipping them with the pre-employability skills and the construction skills that they really need. I think there's a recognised skills gap around construction, and that again that was really one of the driving forces behind the skills centre itself. When we commissioned the delivery partner for the skills centre in partnership with Lend-Lease, so it's a good example of public and private sector working together. When we commissioned the delivery partner, we had a host of pitches of organisations pitching up with menus of what they would deliver. But actually the successful candidate didn't do that, because for them it was more around how they're going to engage the employers, the construction firms that are working in the borough, to understand what skills needs do they need there and then, and the skills needs that are coming on stream, and then making sure that the centre works in real time to provide those. And I think that's been a real element of the success of the centre. It really does. It moves away from that kind of that learner demand to that employer demand approach. So genuinely employer led in that perspective. I think one of the other big challenges is around how we promote the value of the sector in terms of a place where people want to work. There are definite perceptions of the sector, both in terms of residents who are out of work, prospective employees for the sector, but also for young people, their families as well. And so again, a big driver for the skills sector was not only around working with employers to provide local residents with the skills that those employers want, but also doing that much bigger cultural education piece in terms of working with schools in particular, and working with other institutions to really show that actually the construction sector can be can offer a good, genuine, well-paid career for people, and that actually within the sector there are a range of opportunities that will attract a lot of people. And John White, the centre manager, very passionate guy, lives and breathes the skills centre. He likes to tell a story whereby when they host visits from schools, at the outset he will kind of ask for a hands up in terms of who sees this sector as relevant for you, and as can you see yourself working here? And normally at the outset there'll just be sort of one or two hands out of a class of 20 or so. And then he will ask the same question at the end of the session, and almost without fail, a majority of the hands go up. So I think it's around supply, it's around skills gap, and it's around promoting the sector, and those three things are really kind of fundamental to how the Construction Skills Centre works.
And you mentioned culture, because it's not just the culture of the residents, the culture of, dare I say, a major developer who's very male and Australian kind of traditional construction company.
Absolutely.
How do they, do they understand the softer problems, within inner London, perhaps, in terms of how we take on people from a very diverse background? That, when I walk into these organisations, they all look like me still.
No, that's absolutely right. And when I was about to jump in before and talk about the construction in terms of inclusion, a big part of what the Skills Centre is about including the local community and about working with employers and residents to promote the industry to women, to the BAME community, to people with disabilities, and the provider's actually targeted around those things, quite stretching targets, we think, and they're making real headway, making real changes in terms of introducing new people to the sector very successfully.
And finally, I'll give way to my friend to my left. In terms of those targets, are you driving those targets as the London Borough of Southwark in partnership with, in this case, Lend-Lease, or are they leading and effectively in your...
Very much partnership.
It is. Okay.
There's a governance arrangements that includes both organisations, a board which includes a director from Lend-Lease and the cabinet member for employment and skills from Southwark that oversees the delivery, and the delivery partner really for a robust process of monitoring reports to both organisations in terms of reporting on its progress against a range of outcome measures and impacts, because for us it's not only about the number of residents that have been trained, how many of those residents have actually then gone on to get a job. So we've put a real onus on the provider to make sure that they continue to track clients as they go through the centre. I should say we talk about it as it's called the Southwark Construction Skills Centre, and obviously Southwark Council was the main driver in terms of getting the thing, paying for the build of the centre, and it's very much our centre. But it operates very much as a sub-regional and a regional centre. You don't have to be a Southwark resident to access the centre. I think about 40% of people that go through the centre are from Southwark, but the rest are from surrounding boroughs. And the centre itself operates on a commercial basis. It works with employers to understand what they want. It's providing a service for those employers. There's a payment for that, and it provides then that developer with a flow of people who have the skills that employer is looking for.
Thank you.
I just sort of probe a little bit more. So I'm a woman living in Southwark, and I'm a bit tied to my locality. I haven't got much money. I can't afford to go to Heanue. It costs too much to travel and so on. I want to have work in my local community. I've got kids. What are you going to offer me? I mean, I'm assuming this is, in construction, not a back office job, which could be in anything kind of thing. What kind of things would you be offering me? What opportunities for jobs? What sort of jobs would you be trying to pitch to me?
I mean, it depends what was available. Again, that's the point. It works with what employers need at that time. But what it would try to do is to understand what skills you had, what your motivations were to work in the sector, what skills you needed. Are they kind of the softer skills or the kind of the more specific skills? Are you interested in?
Be tangible.
Well, are you interested in
plumbing or what?
Are you interested in dry lining or brickwork, or actually is it an office job, a procurement job within the sector? It really does depend on your motivations as an individual, your personal circumstances, and where you want to go. That's what the Skills Centre will really try to do, is understand your circumstances. I mean, it may be after a conversation, and you've talked about sort of as a mum having childcare responsibilities, that maybe you're actually after a conversation, a career in construction isn't right for you at that particular point in time. But again, that's as much a part of the process as anything, but it's about helping you to navigate the process. What the Skills Centre will also do, though, it's It's very well engaged locally. It works very closely with Southwark Works, who I've mentioned previously. So if the skills centre can't help you, it will put you in touch with a sort of a partner that can.
That's good. That's really good. And how would you convince me? I mean, my perception of some of the skills is that the employer might need them now, but won't need them in 6 months' time. So then what do I do?
Absolutely. And so that's one of the challenges with construction in particular, and one big focus, coming back onto the discussion we had previously around good work and the kind of the continuous upskilling that was mentioned earlier. The Skills Centre, one of the visions of the Skills Centre is upskilling the industry, working with people who already work in construction to help them move on up the ladder and onto their next role. And they've got as challenging targets around that as they have around supporting people who are just embarking on their career. So it's as big a focus.
Can I ask too? I mean, the planning committee has produced a report on how we can accelerate house building and all sorts of building actually through modular and MMC. And I'm just wondering. I mean, it opens up the possibility of a very different perception of the industry. It could attract people who are interested in engineering, or might be more attractive to women. And I'm just wondering what your experience has been of that.
It's going to change.
Of offering jobs in assembly or different kinds of jobs in precision manufacturing.
Change. I mean, Lend-Lease, our delivery partner, is looking at modular construction on one of its sites, and we've had discussions with them around what that's going to look like. Different types of roles, less roles actually, and that's one of the big challenges I think going forward. As modular construction becomes more and more mainstream, there's actually going to be less roles as a result of the impact of that change in the sector. I think two things. One is that transition is not going to happen overnight. I think there are challenges around, as far as I understand it, there are challenges around the physical supply of the manufacturing of these things. That means actually there's still going to be a high reliance on traditional trades and traditional methods of construction for some time yet. So I don't think we're going to see a sort of a revolution so much as an evolution.
I think we're straying into the territory of the planning committee here. Just before I bring in my
construction skills.
Well, I that's how I see it. Just before I bring in my colleague here, I just want to talk again about your construction site, your academy. What's very clear, it's called a Southwark Construction Academy. I was very happy to hear you say that 40% of people who go through it are from Southwark, it's people from Aberford. But what advertising, how does, I live in Havering, for instance, we have, comparable levels of unemployment. How do my young people find out about your service? Is that possible for them?
It's certainly possible.
How likely is it then?
To be honest, we're in a very enviable position, although it is something that we need to tackle. That actually the Skills Centre has been so successful, there's an issue of capacity now. And so the conversations we're having with the provider is sort of, do we build up? Do we build outwards? Do we look at other methods of delivery? So the centre's at capacity. So in terms of going out and doing a massive marketing campaign to get in an influx of additional residents, that's probably not. We're not kind of in that place at the moment, and that's a good place to be in a way. But what we don't want to happen is for Southwark residents in particular, but any residents not to be able to access the service because they can't accommodate. The focus of the centre for us is on supporting Southwark residents into
I understand
into
your,
the centre.
your council paid for it, but is there any conversations going on about spreading best practice? Because obviously the challenge for London's a huge place. Much of the redevelopment is in the middle with boroughs such as Southwark, but of course there's unemployment around the outside of London as well, and the challenge for the GLA, the adult education budget, and other boroughs where Southwark could be very helpful, is how do we replicate that and spread some of the relative wealth of London outwards and not just lock it in zone 1.
That's absolutely right. And the centre itself works very proactively with the GLA to look at how the model can be replicated, but also how the centre can play an integral role in the Mayor's Construction Academy initiative.
Maybe Michael can explain.
Yes, I was going to come in there because when we were researching how the Construction Academy would be configured, we did look to examples of good practice such as this, such as the one in Newham, such as the one, there are several of these dotted around London. And we thought, well, that's what the model is. The model has to be a locally responsive offer that has revenue-funded provision and employers with vacancies to fill that are put into the same space. We envisage there being up to 6 hubs around London in the first instance, and dependent upon securing additional revenue funds, we could increase that over time. But it is about offering an opportunity to present a local offer for those residents, not just in one location, but perhaps in 6. But we're not locking that down. We'll wait to see what the market comes back and tells us it needs.
Can I just quickly ask, you're not going to try and reinvent the wheel, you are going to use the existing centres around London, presumably in partners around London, in your strategy?
If they meet our, you mean for the Construction Academy?
Yes.
If they meet our criteria, which is quite high, yeah. But we certainly learn from them, and some of the mistakes, because some of the, you mentioned, I was very impressed for you to say about 40% of those accessing the centre are from the borough. Not all of them operate in that way. They want 100%, and that's challenging.
I just make a plea for out of London because we run the risk of being a zone 1 GLA. And, when you come far east where we live, we have many, if not more problems than you have in the centre because you have all this redevelopment work, regeneration work, which we don't, but we certainly have people who should be benefiting from the wealth of London. And if this policy set isn't done correctly, we will not get that benefit for those residents. But moving on.
Outer London.
In outer London. Moving on back to my colleague, Navin.
Yeah, we already covered aspects about underrepresented groups in particular, BME, the gender and so on, and the younger people and so on, and how, both access and inclusion are being kind of considered, and interventions for those underrepresented groups. Specific to that, what recommendations do you think you would like to make to the Mayor as he finalizes his skills strategy? Tony, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm happy to go first. So, I think the draft that came out for consultation, I thought looked good. I thought there was a lot of really good stuff in it. I think there's definitely some really strong proposals for how the Mayor will take it forward. I think there's a few things that we might do. I mentioned earlier about sort of system change. I do think it's really important that we try to think about skills and employment much more broadly than just the particular levers or funding streams that we're getting access to. I think there's a real challenge, particularly around devolution of powers, where central government plays this game, this earned autonomy game of like devolving powers to local government, and they devolve it in silos. And then they put constraints and restrictions around how that money is then used and how it's done, which then encourages that local level of government to then operate them in silos, in effect, and have to report back up on them as well. And then from time to time, like with the devolution deals and the city deals, there's an attempt for a more comprehensive deal which looks across silos and tries to integrate. But then in practice, when it comes to be implemented, usually we end up back with kind of meeting readiness criteria for the adult education budget devolution, ensuring that we deliver the national entitlements, ensuring that we've got clear plans for stability in the sector, etc. And it's hard then, I think, to get the horizontal. The real benefit of devolution must be getting horizontal integration. So we get out of the vertical sort of silos and we work horizontally and think about how we can join services up. So I would make a plea for sort of really sort of setting out how the GLA in London and the government of London can really use its convening power and use the power of councils as well, and work with, for example, the NHS, work with schools and academy chains and so on, work with colleges and work across services to really try to have a really sort of properly integrated strategy. I think that would be sort of challenge one. Secondly, there's something I think about a strong focus on employment as well. Job Centre Plus isn't a devolved service, but DWP, Job Centre Plus in London does work very closely with boroughs, and it works very closely with those who are delivering services. So trying to kind of cut a deal and work effectively with DWP and Job Centre Plus in London, for example, universal credit being a case in point, there's an opportunity. There's real risks with it, but there's opportunities too. I think it'd be really important. I think that focus on employment outcomes is not just viewing this as a skills pipeline issue, but a real focus on employment outcomes, I think is key. And I suppose the sort of third thing I've just there's then I think there's a few related things about actually the mechanics of how we deliver effective support. So in particular about how we engage with and work with partners and organisations that can help us to identify, reach, engage with and enrol really disadvantaged groups. The biggest risk when we're doing it, I think, sort of employment and skills support, is that we reach the people who always do that sort of stuff, who would always benefit from it. And we don't reach the people who are really sort of disadvantaged, in particular long-term workers. And so I think that is where you come to things like housing associations and community, voluntary community organisations, but also things like GPs, community health practitioners, children's centres where they still exist, and engaging with nurseries and so on, and using that kind of those extensive networks we've got. So there's a point about engagement. I think then there is also a point about kind of the provision and how we can better do more of what works, I suppose. And we've talked about what some of that looks like, but thinking about how we can better align and bring in things like group support where we think that works, work experience, access to appropriate skills training, the right kind of childcare or housing, whatever support. So it's very easy for me on the outside to sort of be a critic and say, here's all the stuff you should do, and it's really hard when you're inside it to kind of to do everything you might want to. But I think that focus on kind of system change, on working through partners as far as we can, and I'm really focusing on employment outcomes and how we can really transform that kind of employment conversation, not just a skills one, I think would be three things I'll focus on.
You want to add to this from GLA perspective?
Those are what we want to achieve, really. We certainly want to achieve, have a better focus upon employment outcomes, absolutely, not just skills. But furthermore, you mentioned about demonstrating readiness conditions. That's partly about gaining the confidence of the marketplace, but also not destabilising the system as it stands in the first year, but being confident enough to push for change over time. Mm-hmm. So yes, I think that what's proposed now does take account of what Tony says he would welcome seeing in the strategy.
It's a matter of making sure that the strategy is fit for purpose and that it will deliver for both disadvantaged groups, might call it, as well as overall, skills and low pay, etc., that we've been talking about. So anything, that can come forward as recommendations. Now, any thoughts you have, or afterwards, if you can, please write to us. I think it's important that, we have documents which actually do deliver in the end. Yeah. Danny, do you want to?
I'm not sure what else there is to...
no, just in case,
I agree with all of the above.
Right.
Okay,
fine.
Dr. Sand.
Yes. I want to explore the European Social Fund. Thinking about the things that we talked about previously, what learning have you had from the European Fund and how that works in helping us get the skills necessary?
Well, I think if I think about our last evaluation of our last programme, I mean, that was a programme specifically focusing on young people and 3 groups of disadvantaged young people, really, those who were had multiple exclusions from school and therefore are more at risk of becoming NEET and being long-term NEET, young offenders and young disabled people who there's a particular risk for them of getting in a cycle of training course, another training course that never leads to work, and that's one of the issues we were trying to address, and so it was a very employment-focused programme. And I think that there are a number of things, there are some things that come out of those, the evaluations of those programmes that are really across the piece, and I think one of those is that there's a real need for continuity of support. And I think it goes back a bit to what some of the other people have been saying around integration and making sure that if you haven't exactly got the right thing for this person, you're finding something else for them. A lot of the client groups we work with, they've experienced situations where they get handed off all the time. You know, particularly I think for young offenders is a group that's a particular issue for, but a lot of our groups. So they're always being said, oh, well, this person will help you with this, and this person will help you with this, and this person will help you with this. There's no one who brings it all together for them. And I think that one of the key learnings on the evaluation side was that a continuity of an advisor who's there, who does refer them on, because they're not the specialist in everything, nobody's a specialist in everything, but then who's there to pick them up again after that bit of intervention that another organisation has provided. So that's a really key element, I think, when you're working with people who are particularly disadvantaged. It enables those relationships of trust to be built over time. I think that although I think group workshops does work for some people, one-to-one support is still really critical for a lot of the people that we're talking about. I think the voluntary nature of particularly our ESF projects is very important, and you know, a lot of Job Centre Plus programmes are mandatory, and I understand the reasons why they have to be, but I do think it makes a difference to the participants that they can choose to come and they choose to participate. So I think that voluntary nature is quite important. Our programmes there was, even with the employment projects, there was still quite a lot of emphasis on people's options in terms of education and training, whether in work, if they were going on to employment, or just the options open to the advice and guidance side. And then the other thing I think that was key, it was particularly key on the project for young disabled people, but I'd say it's key across the board, and it's something that it's very hard to do, and that's the employer linkage. I think just across the board with training projects for disadvantaged groups, whether they're ESF funded or not, providers find it very hard quite often to get good links with employers that result in good opportunities for participants. And it's not that there are many good examples out there, but still, as a generalisation, it's a very difficult area. And where I think projects work well is where those connections are made, and where the providers recognise that it's not just the person being supported that needs help, but also quite often the employer needs advice and support at, you know, whether it's their recruitment practices or their understanding if an issue arises in the workplace about how to engage with the in our case, young person, but how to engage with the person that they're, so that they don't just say, no, this isn't working, and then that person's lost that job and that's another rejection for them. So I think that the working with employers is actually really hard to do, but as important often as working with beneficiaries. I don't know if others from their experience got things they want to add in.
And thinking about the ESF funding programs in particular, how are they linked with the other GLA regeneration programs? I mean, what's the interlink and connectivity between the two?
This sort of goes back to Tony's silos. It's actually very difficult to link regeneration programs and European Social Fund, and part of the problem is that a lot of regeneration funds are capital funded. Most regeneration funds are capital funding. And the ESF rules make it very difficult to bring capital and revenue funding together. So we can see all the benefits, you know, for the construction project is one, we can see all the benefits, but it's in practice quite a difficult thing to do. You end up with for providers, they might have 2 different contracts, there'll be different reporting, there'll be different monitoring. It becomes quite complex to do. The timelines might be very different. So a capital project in a local area might take 2 or 3 years to build. At what point does the training project engage with that? So, you know, funding it at this point early on, but funding them both at the same time might not be the most appropriate way of doing it. So there are lots of technical difficulties in terms of bringing the 2 together. And it's always in theory been possible, for example, to use ERDF and ESF together in projects, but in practice, apart from some of the business support projects, it's actually really hard to do that where it's a capital and revenue combination. I think what we recognise this, what we have tried to do, to be a bit more positive, is that we, under the last round of our good growth funding, the Regeneration team's good growth funding, we took some of our ESF allocation and we made that available. We basically said we're looking for organisations to come to us with ideas which link some sort of capital or business, but mainly capital project in a local area, and look to use some ESF to do some training and skills work around that and employment work around that. I'm going to be completely honest, we didn't get that many. We got about 11% of bids proposed it, but a lot of them wanted to use their own organisation, and then we get back to the ESF rules, which say that we as a co-financing organisation have to go out to open and competitive tendering, so we can't just give the money to this organisation to deliver. So that was one of the issues, and there were other reasons that some of them were asking for actually very small amounts of money, and they'd misunderstood really the way it worked. So we haven't thrown the baby out the bathwater, and with the next, we've learned from that. With the next round of good growth, we're also going to still be offering ESF, but we've changed what we've said to them is don't put in an application until you've spoken to us about how this works, because we recognise all the technical difficulties around that. And the other thing I think that we've learned from that experience is that what we identified was that there were some common themes around there where people were asked, where we couldn't provide the ESF, but we could see that there was a need. And that's particularly the business growth projects that Helen mentioned, where people were asking for funding to help people to set up their own businesses. Which is fine, you can do that under ESF, but as part of the proposal they put forward, we couldn't fund it. So we've taken those proposals from individual projects, and we have identified that there is a need to do something there, and we've gone back to the LEAP and asked for, which they've kindly given us some match funding, and we're now going to be procuring a programme, 2 programmes in fact, which will be one which will be focused on supporting disadvantaged people into entrepreneurship, and one which will be focused on, actually Helen, you know it better than me, is
focus on supporting small organisations, and particularly we hope particularly to focus it on workspaces that have funding from capital money to help them access local talent and do some work within the community so that they're offering opportunities out to people in the local community who may not normally get that. So we're looking at social integration outcomes as well, and we're doing, the LEAP are currently doing a bit of research actually into potentially running an accreditation scheme for working spaces and co-working spaces to look at social outcomes. So that's something we're hoping to sort of feed into through this project as well. And I think it's probably worth noting that part of the reason we kind of offered out the ESF alongside the capital funding was to get bidders thinking, actually, how can I involve employability and skills in this capital regeneration? And 11% actually did put in, which I think is really keen, and we've had many conversations with organisations who potentially weren't successful but are thinking about what they can do. And I think we're going out again in the next round, and I expect to see maybe 4 or 5 come through this time, which are going to be more successful. So it's a work in progress, but it's positive to see people thinking a bit more about not just what's going to happen with the place, but who are they going to engage in that place, and how are they going to engage them so it's meaningful.
I mean, if I can, sort of on a slight tangent, but the other thing I think I'd say is that post-Brexit, we'd really like, I think this is probably a personal view, but we'd really like the new Shared Prosperity Fund to provide those opportunities that perhaps it's difficult to do with ERDF and ESF that enable us to bring together the capital side of things and the revenue side of things, because we think there's massive opportunity here that it's just difficult to deliver.
For preempting that question, which is coming, right? Or what have we learned from this, right? And then give it. And also, finally, what levers can council use to make sure there are employment benefits to local population from regeneration programs?
It's probably better for Southwark to answer that. I mean, it's not really my area. I think probably I can draw the committee's attention to the London Plan, because that encourages local labour policies. There's a section there on skills, and it encourages local authorities to use their powers to promote local labour initiatives through the planning process. I think local authorities are taking an increasing role in regeneration programmes as partners within that, and that gives them more opportunity to influence whether there are skills programs. But I'm really not an expert. So.
There are levers. I think a lot of the levers are around relationships and how we utilise those relationships to our advantage. Certainly, the relationships with the developers themselves. Our Section 106 policies give us teeth in those relationships, but the approach we take in Southwark, and one of the reasons I think we've got such a successful Section 106 policy, and just to give you some stats, since 2014 we've created 1,400 jobs and over 300 apprenticeships for our Section 106 agreements with developers. And in part that's been because we've been very robust in our enforcement, but also very supportive in terms of application. And where there have been challenges for developers, we've looked to see where we can work with those developers to overcome those challenges. The Skills Centre is a really good example of that. Developers saying, you're putting these undeliverable targets on us, we can't get the residents with the skills. We'll give you the residents of the skills. We'll build a skills centre to help do that. So that kind of that relationship with developers and getting that relationship right, particularly with big developers in big sites where they're going to be working in the borough for a long number of years. I think that's critical. The other big one is the relationships with employers. And we've talked a bit about relationships with employers, but they're a critical part of this whole area around employment and skills if we're going to get it right. Working with employers, helping them to understand our perspective, why this is important, what role they can play in promoting a strong local economy, and really providing the infrastructure whereby those conversations can take place at a very productive level. In Southwark, for example, we've got our major business forum, so we work with a whole range of very large employers from across the borough, including sort of PwC, EY, News UK, Gardens and Thomas's, so all sectors as well. We come together on a regular basis to discuss issues that are challenges for us both in terms of the local economy, things like Brexit, things like local employment, things like apprenticeships, things like good work and what does that mean, paying a living wage, all of those kind of things, all of those kind of discussions we have with employers. And I think that helps us to understand some of the challenges and helps us to work with employers to overcome some of the barriers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to close this out with our last few questions. Excuse me. I think I'm focusing this on Michael and Tony in the beginning. How are all these different programs and their effectiveness being monitored and evaluated? Tony, you spoke earlier that your organisation has done many evaluations. Are you currently involved in evaluating anything that would be important to this discussion?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, quite a few. There are quite a few sort of relevant programmes and initiatives. So I suppose talking about some of the principles of how we do that, I think there's a point about monitoring, So as you said, you sort of about monitoring and evaluation. There's definitely a point about monitoring and making sure that we're really clear about what are the outcomes that we're trying to achieve for participants, and how do we know when those have been achieved. So what are the kind of outputs or success measures that map onto those outcomes? That sounds really obvious, but in practice, you would probably be surprised, or maybe not surprised, at how often some of that stuff gets overlooked in the rush to kind of get a programme off the ground and get it up and running. I think the GLA has always, or certainly in the years I've been involved in it, has always been very focused on sort of outcome-based commissioning and focusing on being able to measure those employment and skills outcomes. So programme monitoring is really important, and how we can use that in particular as well to drive to address differences in performance within programmes is really key. And I do think it's quite, what you do tend to find is quite significant variation, particularly where you've got, like, for example, London-wide programmes, significant variation in performance between boroughs, just as you do nationally between areas. So how you build in a kind of performance management, contract management, quality management system that enables you to identify those, address those, and share practice is really key. On evaluation, I would say this, wouldn't I, because we're an organisation that does evaluation. I think that there can be a tendency to, for example, commission evaluations quite late, and to not really think about how you'd evaluate a strategy, how you'd evaluate a programme until you've actually started delivering it. I would say thinking about those evaluation questions at the very start is really, really, really important. How will we know? We understand our objectives. How will we know that we've achieved them, and how we evidence that to other people? What we tend not to do a lot of in this country, actually, generally, is set things up in a sort of, as at least not in this space, is sort of trials, if you like, where you'd have one group get the intervention, another group don't, and you compare the outcomes. We don't treat it in a sort of like a clinical or a scientific way, and I think that's understandable. These are sort of social, these are services that are based on delivering to people, and they rely on partner engagement. You don't want to have winners and losers and so on. But really thinking about how you'll get the data and insights, maybe to measure the effectiveness of what you do, is really important. And partly why it's so important is because in this space, in employment interventions in particular, we hear people always quote like headline figures, 50%, 60%, however many percent in work. What really matters is how many people get jobs, get outcomes who wouldn't have got them without the intervention. And that can be a much lower number. If you're not being really careful about making sure that the programme's reaching the right people, so people who wouldn't otherwise benefit, and that it's delivering things that will lead to positive improvements in outcomes, the additional impact can be quite low. And that's fiendishly difficult, fiendishly complex, and we'll hold our hands up on this. The ESF evaluation is a case in point. It's been really, we wanted to do a kind of an impact assessment, and ultimately we couldn't as part of it, because it's really hard to do that, if it's, if we're trying to also implement and improve programmes, and we're trying to do that in a sort of live environment rather than as a trial. So I think there's a lot we can learn from kind of how we measure performance, how we manage quality and improvement, and then how in evaluation, how we try to focus on like the added value of what we do. But I do think a core part of that must be about having good quality, like independent evaluation.
Michael, I'll just address this question to you. How will we know that the adult education strategy is good? Have you, to continue Tony's points, have you pre-planned what you'll be looking at? Because one of the criticisms of many of the mayor's strategies have been the lack of key performance indicators, no way of tracking effectiveness. How have you, in the piece of work you're working on now, which is very important to Londoners who are struggling, how have you planned to have that evaluated so you can adjust along the way?
There is a framework that's being prepared that will sit alongside the strategy, which will be the metrics that will be captured to demonstrate just that. Alongside that, there are, of course, Ofsted measures that can be considered in terms of quality, and that's around teaching and learning and leadership and management of an institution. We are going to attach very clear KPIs to the Construction Academy outputs, and which will be monitored. And I think the points you've raised about effective, impactful evaluation factored in from day one is something we'll absolutely have to prioritise on this.
When you say you have to, have you already done that? Could you?
No, we're still designing the programme for the Mayor's Construction Academy.
Okay.
But the framework is very advanced in its in its structure in terms of how it will align to things like the ESF programme, where the complementarity is. But I think we've been very clear that we want to see outcomes such as employment. We actually want that to be measured, which is not happening systematically now.
Do you have any kind of independent evaluation of this strategy coming along?
The strategy itself, well, it was widely consulted upon earlier this year, and we've taken on lots of comments, including, I believe, from the Assembly. Yeah, that's...
I don't think there's an evaluation of the overall strategy planned. I think that it will be implemented through various different measures, AEB being one of them, and those individual measures, I suspect, will be evaluated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Just, I suppose you do have the benefit of scrutiny committees to look into that later into the year, and I'm sure they will. My very final question to everybody to chip in really: what more needs to be done to strengthen links between developers and local markets? And then an additional question to you, Michael: why a construction academy? Why not a different academy?
So it's about bringing together supply and demand. So you're supplying trained individuals in areas where there is demand for jobs to be filled. Jules Pipe, as the Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and Skills, has already recognised that you could technically do this focus across any sector of the economy. Health and social care. I mean, I could go on, but it's absolutely correct that could be applied. But we are prioritising construction because we have got very challenging housing targets, and if a lack of construction skills is perceived to be hampering the delivery of those, then we have to act.
That's fair enough. Does anybody want to make any final comments about the link between developers and the labour market? How we bridge that gap?
Yes, just a couple of things from me. Maintaining that focus on the supply side. I think there's been a lot of conversations around addressing some of the challenges around links between regeneration, jobs in construction, and local people through kind of things like pooling of Section 106 obligations across boroughs.
Yeah.
Whilst that might have some benefits if implemented correctly, what it's not going to do is sort out the supply issues, which I think are fundamental to the challenge. How do we make sure that residents A, want to go into construction, and B, have the skills to do so? I guess the second thing for me is we talked a little bit about modular construction and the scale of impact that might have in terms of jobs in the construction sector. I think there's a role for the GLA in terms of working with boroughs to help us to kind of understand what that's going to look like and how we work with that.
A couple of things. So one, I think, is there's a real importance about trying to speak with one voice to developers as employers. I think if I were a developer, I would probably struggle with this, where you have Job Centre Plus talking to you about vacancies, you've got council or borough level initiatives trying to engage you, like the excellent example in Southwark. We've got new construction centres being commissioned. We've also got the construction industry training board playing a role in trying to help with mapping skills needs and so on. National Retraining Scheme, new national initiative from Department for Education, which has two priorities at the moment, one of which is construction, the other is digital. Everybody's in this space. How do we speak with one voice to developers and try to coordinate? And that's quite hard, actually, because those relationships are really jealously guarded by the organisations that have them. Like Job Centre Plus puts a really high premium on its account management of employers. Of course it does, as I'm certain you would, as the GLA would, as the National Retraining Scheme will. And of course colleges too, as the deliverers of, and independent training providers, the deliverers of an enormous amount of this activity. So is there a question, is one of the things, I didn't mention it earlier, but it occurs to me on the skills strategy, should we be thinking about what a kind of a single employer engagement strategy looks like? How do we have kind of one approach that can try to actually be a single point of contact, but actually to make that work would rely on all of those organisations that jealously guard those relationships being prepared to be open about, and that's a really hard thing to do, but that must be a challenge. The second, I think, is think about the role of schools. I do think a real challenge in construction in particular is that it's not seen as a very attractive option. This is true in technical and vocational skills generally, but construction in particular, because it is such a cyclical industry, you think about the downturn in particular, shedding jobs at a rate of knots. And for teachers, that's not going to be seen as, and we know it isn't seen, we know it's from research, it isn't seen as a secure and a viable and a potentially successful career for many young people. But we all know that it's really important. So there's really good stuff in the strategy about engaging with schools and getting employers into schools. So let's put a really high premium on getting developers into schools, getting employers in the construction sector into schools as part of that strategy. That feels like a real opportunity. And third, one I've got no answer for, is how do we make sure that Section 106 agreements last longer than just the agreement? Because some of the work we did, certainly we've done in the past, and a specific example we were involved in Westfield, in Stratford, it was great for as long as the Section 106 agreement was in place. Everyone was very cooperative and open, not always, but usually quite cooperative and open about recruitment practices and how they engage local residents and support disadvantaged groups. When the agreement ended, of course, these are national organisations that have their own recruitment channels, etc., and it all just withers on the vine. So what can we do to make sure that doesn't drop off, that this is a permanent feature of how we engage with employers and how we support social inclusion rather than just a temporary one.
Thank you. Any more comments?
From our side, I think it's...
Okay, thank you. Well, I think I'll call our discussion to a conclusion there. I'd like to thank our guests for a very constructive conversation. I feel far better informed than when I arrived. I think we'll get some strong recommendations out there. I'll just remind you that when you leave, should you have a very bright idea, please don't hesitate to write to us. We'd like to hear said bright idea. We have a few small bits of formal business to go through. Please feel at your leisure to leave. But if you don't, I'd like to say hello afterwards. I'd like to have a quick chat with you all. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion we've just had? Can I ask committees to delegate authority to me in consultation with the Deputy Chair to agree the outputs from this meeting?
Chair, can I add to that the possibility of a site?
Yes, and the possibility of a site visit as well. That I'll take up with the Deputy Chair and we'll let you know the details.
Sure.
Can you note our meeting date and agree a work programme to use our meeting slot on the 20th of June for a site visit to the Royal Docks, and delegate authority to me in consultation with the Deputy Chair to agree the scope and terms of reference for scrutiny of the Royal Docks and the arrangement for the site visit.
Agreed.
Just to note the date of our next meeting, it will be Wednesday the 4th of July 2018 at 2:30 in the Chamber. I have no other urgent business, so I call this meeting to an end.
Thank you, Chair.
That's it. Easy. One down.
GLA Chamber Sound. GLA